Hello, this is producer Pete, welcoming you to the third part of our Faces of War trilogy. We've heard about the assassin who triggered the first great conflict of modern times. We've heard from the woman who, with great but understated bravery, reports from the front line. Now it's time to hear from a soldier. A man who rose through the ranks to become one of the world's most elite fighting troops, and then renounced war and killing. This is a specially extended show. You won't hear its like on conventional media. Please share it far and wide.
Live and uncensored.
Special forces are the ninjas of modern warfare. Wutai! And if you think their activities are confined to war zones such as Iraq or Afghanistan, wake the hell up. Officially, America's special forces operate clandestine missions in 60% of the world's nations. Are you kidding me? 60%. Britain's SAS, the Special Air Service, is the model on which other countries' special forces are based. Yes, suck it, Navy SEALs and Delta Force. Right down to the selection process. It lasts for 5 months and is so demanding it has a 90% fail rate. One man, though, who didn't fail is Mr. Ben Griffin, and he's here with us tonight.
Intelligent listening for dangerous minds.
This is Litopia.
Litopia After Dark. After Dark.
You've trained to be an SAS warrior, the best soldier killer ever created. In the dead of night, you become the front lines with the entire weight of the world's most powerful military ever at your back. But then, something happens. You kill one too many. You start feeling dehumanized. You drop out of the machine and become a what? A peace activist? Ben, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ian.
What's it like to have another human being in your crosshairs and to pull the trigger?
Well, that's a strange thing, Ian, because straight away you've highlighted one of the misconceptions of warfare. There's a huge difference between what actually goes on and what the public think goes on.
Whoa, hold on. Back it up there, Tiger. Now, Pete prepared for this show by watching or playing Call of Duty for about 6 hours?
Slight exaggeration.
Yeah.
Let's go with that concept for a bit.
7. Okay, right. I prepped for the show by watching 3 straight episodes of Strike Back Shadow Warfare, which you might be familiar with on
I'm
Sky
not
TV.
familiar with that show.
Okay,
no.
well, I don't want to spoil the plot for you because I'm sure you'll find it. But the way that seems to go, and again, spoiler alert, it goes sort of torture, from which we get the intel, then we have a night raid followed by a firefight, then a car train helo crash, then we have a fist bump, a stiff drink, and we shag like a hot KSB agent. And we wake up, and the guy we see during the night raid gives us more intel, and we start the whole sequence again, only this time we crash a boat into a skyscraper. You're saying that it doesn't go down like that?
No, it doesn't go down like that. But I suppose one of the first things that we should sort of look into is the difference between reality and film. I take it this is a film or a TV show?
This is a regular TV show. I think it's in its third. I think it's in its 3rd or 4th series. My wife calls it interchangeable manhunk.
is that anyone within the military gets a very narrow view of what's going on, because the tasks within the military are compartmentalized into smaller tasks. So within a film, you might see the guys doing the surveillance, the guys doing the raid, the guys doing the torture, the guys making the decisions. But actually, in reality, those are separate jobs.
Okay, wait, but I'm 16, let's say, and I want to join the armed forces. You're saying this is not what happens? I don't get to be like, James Bond, License to Kill, and just parachute me into a country, and I just get to drink and shag and shoot people and fist bump my friends and go home?
When I was a kid, it was I don't know if you have them in the States, but we used to have these very small comic books called the Commando comic books. They might be 60 pages long.
We just had our father's rifles and handguns. But yeah, go on.
But there'd be a story in there basically involving some plucky British commandos taking on some Germans or taking on some Japanese. And the Germans and the Japanese were always stereotyped, so that the Japanese would have the little round glasses, and
right.
So that's how we were sort of misled into believing what it was like to be in the military. And I suppose what our children are facing today is a much more sophisticated version of that, with your Call of Duty video games and your TV programs. But the reality of soldiering hasn't really changed much, in the sense that, well, for a start, long periods of boredom. You know, there's long periods of time when nothing happens, but also the day-to-day life of a soldier, I'm talking about an infantry soldier, is one of hardship. You know, it's one of being cold, wet, hot, hungry, thirsty, carrying huge weights on your pack. You know, there's not much glamour involved in it.
Wow. Yeah, that's not like Strike Force at all.
I presume you're actually talking for all the forces in the world. We're not talking just British or American forces.
I suppose my experience is within the British military, but, you know, I think there are things that are common throughout armies around the world.
Okay, well, if we can get to your particular specialty, I mean, SAS, this is elite forces. What was your role in a tactical assault team?
That can change on a day-to-day basis. So one of the tasks I was trained for was explosive method of entry, which means to use explosives to get into someone's house. Another role I was trained in was to use a long-range shotgun to take out cars if they're trying to flee the scene.
A long-range shotgun?
Yeah, it's kind of like a shotgun, but about twice the length.
So what is your sort of blast radius?
I'm not sure what the blast radius is.
No, I mean, you know what I mean? Like with a shotgun, it sprays out so you can catch birds and things, but with a longer...
A longer range, so it's got...
I'm only familiar with a sawed-off shotgun because of the neighborhoods I lived in the States.
Yeah, and the bank jobs you used to do.
Yeah.
But no, a long-range shotgun has a longer barrel.
Okay.
And also, it doesn't have like a classic shotgun cartridge that splits. It's got a solid shot that can travel distance.
Okay.
And so it's used to fire rounds usually into vehicles from a helicopter.
Okay. Do you have like a tip for an aspiring long-range shotgun user? No.
Ben's the wrong guy to ask that, really, don't you think?
Okay. I was just, he's...
Hello, I'm Eric Beck-Rubin, hardcore out-of-control book enthusiast, inviting you to listen to a new show here on Litopia called Burning Books. Every 3 weeks, we put out a new podcast on a single book. It could be a recent debut, a classic, fiction, non-fiction, and everything in between. The idea is to explore what lies at the heart of great books, books that try to be great but don't quite make it, as well as, now and then, books that are irredeemably bad. So check out our archive shows on Litopia, and we'll look forward to having you join us for our next podcast.
Burning Books, exclusively from litopia.com.
What brought you to originally join the military, the armed service?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question, because I don't think there's a straight...
Well, we don't ask small ones here on Litopia After Dark. We go right for the jugular.
Yeah. No, I don't think there's an easy, short answer to that. You're talking about the poverty draft, you know, within the United Kingdom we have something similar. It's not so overt. But whilst I was serving in the military, most of the voices you would hear, most of the accents would be Welsh, Scottish, North of England, Irish, West Country. You know, it's quite rare to hear someone from the southeast of England. So that kind of tells us that people are joining the military from less affluent parts of the country. So you've got a similar thing going on in the UK military that you've got in the US, but also there's a lot of other complex issues going on. You mentioned about family ties.
Yeah, what about the officer class? Is the officer class, are you going to find some posh accents?
The officers within the British Army, for example, you know, there'd be a higher percentage of people who went to public school, who went to, you know, private fee-paying schools.
Is that because of education?
I think it's because of tradition.
Or tradition? People are sort of grandfathered in.
Well, no. The British Army traditionally recruits its officers from the public schools.
Okay.
The people who do join from your comprehensive schools, actually, a lot of them try to affect the accent of the public schoolboy.
Oh, so they can rise through the ranks.
But also, conversely, I know guys who are from public schools who joined the lower ranks who try to affect working class accents. So it works both ways. You know,
okay.
There's a role, you know, you're trying to play a role there, you know.
According to a 2004 study from the Pentagon, 1 in 8 of all Iraq veterans suffer from post-traumatic stress. You yourself have had experience with post-traumatic stress. What are the feelings of that? What is it like to have?
It's a complex issue. I mean, myself and quite a few veterans actually in America, who I'm in touch with a lot of veterans in America, we don't even like to call it post-traumatic stress disorder.
What is
for us? post-traumatic stress disorder would be something you got from being in a plane crash or a car crash.
Yeah, I know people who have post-traumatic stress disorder from nothing to do with the military.
Yeah, and the psychological damage or the psychological effect of being in the military is something much more complex than post-traumatic stress disorder. For example, when you join the military, you go, especially if you're in an infantry unit or a special forces unit, you go through a period of brainwashing or sort of, indoctrination, enculturation, which changes the function and the way that you think and also the way you react to things. Now, this has a profound effect on the psyche.
This is similar to, for a long time, they were using, I think up until World War II or even Vietnam, that you would shoot at targets that looked like targets. But now you're shooting at, at pictures of the enemy. And then with, again, back to the sort of the video game model, you're trained now to actually shoot people rather than targets. Is that part of the brainwashing?
Yeah, it is part of it. I mean it's a
brainwashing is a pretty
training,
brainwashing.
Are you talking about desensitization? Are you talking about desensitization?
It's more than that. It's desensitization, yes, but also dehumanization. And a lot of people talk about how when you join the military, they dehumanize the enemy, but they also dehumanize the soldier. It's a two-way process. So yeah, so when someone joins the military and goes through military training, they're indoctrinated, enculturated, dehumanized. And then you put that person from a period of training, usually about 6 months, into a hierarchical organization where they have to obey orders, any order that comes down. Now, you get people who question orders every now and again, but when it actually comes to the crux, you obey those orders. So you're putting someone into a hierarchical situation where there is no freedom of choice. And then you take that hierarchical organization and you put it into the chaos of war, where quite often nothing makes sense. Things that happen are irrational. Now, once you've gone through that indoctrination, that enculturation, you've lived under that hierarchical system. And also, let's not forget the other pressure, which is the peer pressure, which is like a horizontal pressure.
Right.
The pressure from your buddies and your colleagues, and then put that into the chaos of war where nothing actually makes any sense. It's all irrational.
Right. And the only thing you know are the people who have your back.
Right.
And you don't want to go against them.
Now,
and suddenly the order comes down in the midst of this chaos, and your brain has been reduced to a sort of putty where they push a button and out comes a bullet.
Now, if you go through those different components, you are going to be affected by that. And so when people say, oh, you've got PTSD, I don't think that truly explains what's going on.
It's a
lot more complex, and there's a lot more components to it. Now, when I first got out of the military, I went to see a mate of mine who had been in the Falklands 20 years before I got out. And he took one look at me and said, you've got PTSD. He uses that term. I don't use that term. I said, what do you mean I've got PTSD? I feel fine. He said, if you've been through what you've been through and you haven't got PTSD, you're a psychopath. And I actually agree with that. What we're seeing is we're seeing people go through a dehumanizing process of military training, and then we're putting them into this hierarchical situation, and also where there's a massive amount of horizontal peer pressure, and then we're putting them into this irrational, a further irrational situation, which is war and immoral, and people are coming out the other side of that with a different take on things. They've been enlightened to what's really going on.
Is part of this that warfare has become more sophisticated in the sense that the soldiers are being trained to obey orders better, or has this something that's existed throughout history, that all warriors will come back from combat with, or because maybe it was, if you want to go back to Roman times, because it was hand-to-hand fighting, people were less inclined to do it, or it was more visceral, so you didn't get a command to push a button and suddenly a whole village is flattened.
You raise a couple of points there. For a start,
keep in mind, I have no idea.
Yeah, sure.
Let's have a look through this. So, all I've done is played Call of Duty and watched Strike Back, so yeah. I'm coming into this.
Well, let's have a look at two things there. One thing, you're talking about the psychological effect of being in the military and going to war. Now, I think there's always been a psychological effect. If we look back to Homer's Iliad, some people see that as a story about a guy coming back from the military, coming back from war, and dealing with his psychological torment of going through that. So I think we can safely say that there's always been a psychological effect of being in the military and going to war.
Okay.
Now, the other aspect that you're talking about is how we train our soldiers. Now, there's a very interesting book by a guy called Lieutenant Colonel Grossman. He's not a peace activist in any way.
I agented that book. Isn't that strange? Actually, he's written a number of books. I agented one of them. Yeah. Stop teaching our
This one?
kids to kill.
Oh.
Is that the one you mean?
Wow.
Okay,
Well,
no, I
On
didn't
Killing
mention
is the
that
one I'm thinking about. Yeah. So in On Killing, Grossman...
Shameless name dropper.
I,
Shameless.
sorry, I had to say that because it's such a coincidence, actually. Yeah.
Well, you had to.
But
It's
he
a coincidence.
co-wrote
Yeah.
Had to drop it in
a
there.
book called "Stop Teaching Our Kids to Kill" about video games.
About video games,
and
or-
I actually
Yeah.
represented the other author. So yeah, we can talk about that later if you want to.
Sure. Well, in his book On Killing, he explains how, for example, during the American Civil War, on the battlefields of Gettysburg, they've dug up the rifles that were used, that are discarded,
Yes.
and there were 9, 10.
They packed them because you don't have the will. People do not want to shoot each other, so they would just pretend to fire and then pack another bullet on top and then pack another bullet
So they
on
were
top.
packing the bullets in, going through the motions, pretending to fire, then packing another bullet on top, and they found 10, 12,
Yeah.
12 rounds. And, I've read studies where they estimate that only 10% of people in the First World War actually tried to shoot someone,
Yeah, I've heard that as well, and that that 10% that did were split between the real heroes who were like, we were going to go and get this and save our friends, and they believed in, and the other 5% were just straight up psychopaths.
Yeah, and you find that also people find other tasks to do, to avoid doing the shooting.
Right.
I'll load up your magazine for you whilst you do the shooting. I'll keep a lookout. I'll pass a message. I'll make a cup of tea. All sorts of things. But anyway, so the military's seen this as a problem.
So basically,
what we've seen in the 20th century is a sophistication of the training processes to ensure that there is a high percentage of people willing to kill. So when we get to the end of the 20th century, we are looking at 95%. Within infantry units, 95% of people are willing to kill.
How have they done that?
I think it's through a process of, Ian mentioned it earlier, that the targets have changed. So I'm not 100% sure, but I think during the build-up to the First World War and during the training of the soldiers during the First World War, they were shooting at round targets.
Yeah.
Now, post-World War II, we get within the British military, figure 11s and figure 12s, which look like sort of human...
mannequins.
Yeah, they're sort of like cardboard cutouts.
Okay, yeah.
And then, whilst I was training in the military, we were using dummies, with clothes on and with hair, so they were three-dimensional, So you're getting people used to shooting at...
So it's essentially, it's become more sophisticated, the training. They're turning you into a type of putty and then squeezing you into the pyramid. And what strikes me as the real, the frightening part is that the action on the other end, when the command comes down, it can be to push a button on a drone and then the whole village gets flattened. And the consequence of the one action that they've now made you willing to do can be quite severe.
Yeah.
So once you're through that machine, once you're ground through that machine, you come out the other side, you've been conditioned to be this thing, and suddenly you're like, what have I just been through? What have I, and that is that feeling of going through that process, PTSD.
Well, let's just take it back one step, because something else that happens within military training is the language is used. So, for example, collateral damage. Yeah, that's an example of it. But for example, when I was training in the infantry, we were never told to kill that person. We were told to aim at the centre of the mass.
Okay.
Right, now think about aim at the centre of the mass. Targets will fall when hit. There's no mention of human. There's no mention of shooting in the chest. It's the centre of the mass. So you're using these terms which don't specifically...
becomes almost a kind of legalese.
Yeah. So they don't specifically elaborate on what that actually means. So the language is very clever, and I actually think that's not a coincidence. That the language has been developed over time.
It's a euphemism, isn't it, that leads to a dehumanisation, really.
Yeah.
So I'd like to just ask about your personal experience.
Sure.
When you went to Iraq, what were your hopes for the mission? Did you believe in what was going on?
No. I deployed to Iraq in 2005. I've been in the military since 1997. And, when you go through this training process, initial training process, and you get guys come out the other end of it after 6 months of training, they're psychos. All they want to do is go to war and kill someone. But the problem the military's got is that over time, these 19-year-olds, 18-year-olds mature.
Right.
And also the distance from the training means that...
Oh no, you start to grow a conscience.
Well,
that must be stopped. You may not develop a spirit, sir.
But these things start to happen, people do get older. I think it was the Nazis who realised that the ideal age to send someone into combat was sort of 17, 18, where they're full of testosterone, they don't think they're going to be killed.
Young, dumb and full of cum.
That sort of attitude, So my attitude in, say, 1997 compared to 2003, completely different, And
that's 6 years, and that's a developmental phase of your life.
Yeah, but I would say, though, that in a similar way that the alcoholic and the drug addict don't fully develop. I don't know if you know any alcoholics or drug addicts, but say someone's...
No. Never met. I've heard about them.
Yeah, I've seen some, in the street. But the drug addict, for example, say someone starts taking, heroin at the age of 17, their development is stunted. Yeah. And I think that's similar with the military as well. I think our development is stunted. We don't develop in the same way that people from outside of the military develop in terms of our conscience, maturity, and all these other things.
They don't want you growing in the soil. They want you growing hydroponically with nutrients that they feed you so that you turn into this, you turn into the tree that they want. It's genetic engineering or genetic modification. They're taking the sort of the nature-nurture debate and saying, no, we're going to nurture you and we're going to turn you into what we like. And occasionally they get an anomaly like you, because they obviously didn't want you to turn out and to be a peace activist. That's not part of that's not part of their whole thing. Was there one particular incident that caused you to kind of fall out of this system?
No. We can go back to talking about me in a minute, but I talk to a lot of veterans. I talk to a lot of veterans who would never say they were peace activists. But if you listen to most guys who've been in warfare, in combat situations, in operational theatres, and you listen to their stories, you listen to what they're saying, and you see through the bravado, you see through that, what they're telling you is an anti-war message. What they're telling you is...
This was horrible.
Yes. And I find that consistent amongst most of the veterans I meet. And I think it's all about time. I think that soldiers are dehumanised during their training, and that dehumanisation continues through their service, and that people develop at different rates. And for some guys, it might not be until they're 50 or 60 when they're that disconnected from the military, that disconnected from those people
when they have enough perspective to look back and see what happened. There's an epiphany of oh my God, what did I do?
What did I do? Exactly.
How did it come to that? And that's when they break down and become drug addicts and alcoholics. So they don't know how to deal with it.
Or
and
worse,
there's not a culture that
because
says...
if you look at the suicide rate of veterans, it's shameful, both in the UK and the US. But they're largely
and
ignored.
it's becoming higher as the process gets more sophisticated. You've had the experience of talking to a lot of veterans, a lot of people who have seen action and who are suddenly coming to realize, whether you call it post-traumatic stress disorder, what they're really having the realization, what did I just do? I haven't had the experience of talking to lots of veterans. I've got you. And I'm asking if it's not... I'd like to know what you went through, what you saw over there. You blew open doors. Yeah. You fired long-distance shotguns at people. I'm asking because I think people need to see the emotional consequences on it rather than the abstract. I've got lots of figures I can throw here. There are 120,000... civilians dead in Iraq since the war began. You hear every time an American serviceman, every time a British serviceman dies, that makes the papers, and there's a parade down, and they throw a parade, they tie a yellow ribbon around the old oak tree. But those are, 130,000 stories. Those are civilians. So I'm asking you,
what happened?
What happened, man?
Yeah. So I suppose. I'd have to think about...
Just start with there I was.
Yeah, well there I was, there I was about to deploy to Iraq. And this was a different deployment to other deployments. I'd been to Northern Ireland, I'd been to Macedonia, Afghanistan. But when I deployed to Iraq in 2005, we already knew about Abu Ghraib. We already knew that there weren't any weapons of mass destruction, right? So that
Afghanistan could almost be justified because the people who had bombed America, they were
Saudis.
They were tangentially.
They weren't
Saudis. Yeah.
They were Okay, but they were Saudis on the plane. They fled to Afghanistan.
Well, they didn't fled anywhere. They died in. in New
No,
York.
but I'm saying, okay, we can go into the various conspiracy, but in the public mind, you could kind of go, I'm just talking like Joe Normal, sitting back watching TV, you can kind of go, yeah, I guess Afghanistan kind of makes sense because that's where like the main guy is, that's where Osama is, so that's got to be it. But then when they went to Iraq and it all started to fall apart, then at the beginning, it's like you're not supporting the troops if you dare to question, why we're going, and then you have, I was infuriated. I went on all the anti-war marches and all this because that just seemed
How do you feel about
ridiculous.
that?
How can they get away with this
argument about not supporting the troops? That it's fair enough to have a discussion and have a debate and do democratic process, but once troops are deployed, you stop talking and you support our boys out there because they're risking their lives for you. That's a strong argument.
I think it's a nonsense argument. In fact, I was at a lecture the other night. Sorry to,
God damn it, Pete.
go away from the personal.
No,
all
he's
the time,
right, though.
No, but I can talk about the personal stuff. But just talking about that, on the eve of the First World War, Emily Pankhurst, the mother of the suffragette movement, threw a rock through the window of Downing Street and was arrested. The next morning, once war was declared, she stopped all activism and said, during the war, this is more important, this takes precedent.
Really?
I'm going to support the troops.
I didn't know that.
Her niece, and I think it might have been Sylvia Pankhurst, I'll be corrected on this, was the opposite. And she was an ardent anti-war activist throughout the whole of the First World War. So there are these different viewpoints and all this, but I would say that when we're faced with this argument, it is a nonsense argument. To say that you can support the troops without tacitly supporting the war that they're fighting, I can't see how you can separate
the two,
those two
can you?
things.
This is interesting.
How can you separate them?
Last week, we had an American war tax resistor,
great,
also a friend of mine, and he basically said, you know what, I'm going to find a way where I don't have to pay any taxes because I'm not paying for this shit. And his business card said, tax resistors, we're not paying for it, had a picture of a fighter plane. Now, Pete put him the question, are you not supporting the troops? That's a traitorous, take that most American public would regard. And he's like, actually, I'm not. They might be wonderful people, but they decided to take part in a project that I don't support. And so the only thing I could do is kind of, say, well, I'm not going to contribute towards it to save my conscience. And so it's actually quite brave because the IRS is after him for 30 grand and this kind of thing. There's the argument of whether you're supporting the troops or whether you're supporting the war. But I'd like to, I want to know what you went through.
Sure. So we've already talked about the sort of context in which I went to Iraq. So we found out that there weren't any weapons of mass destruction. That Abu Ghraib. You
knew you were going under false pretenses with with the military that was compromised.
But then there's a contradiction within all of us. So at the time I was still a professional soldier, and I saw Iraq as another opportunity. On another level. This is a chance to go into combat. To have that experience.
Get experience, come back, move up in the ranks. So there was a contradiction going on in there. And I think it was when I got to Iraq and actually saw what was going on. Now, most of the British experience was in Basra, in the south of Iraq. I was based in Baghdad, inside an American unit. Is that an Anwar province? Is that an Anwar province?
Anbar. I think Baghdad is next to Anbar province. Anbar province is just
I'm an
west.
American, we don't know geography.
I think it's just west and north. Anbar province is west of Baghdad. Okay. Over a period of time, everything I saw in Iraq led me to come to the conclusion that this was wrong, what we were doing over there. So being based in Baghdad, these contractors, these civilian contractors, sort of mercenaries, they were everywhere. Absolutely everywhere, driving all over the place.
These are American.
Way better
these
paid.
are Blackwater boys.
Well, it doesn't matter. Some were Blackwater, some were, there were 100 firms operating in Iraq at the time. Some were British, there were Gurkhas over there, there were Colombians over there. We shouldn't put this just purely onto the Americans. This was a sort of a joint enterprise conducted by Britain, America, and a whole load of private corporations.
So if you happen to own or have shares in one of those corporations, this is a gold mine, isn't it? Well,
that's what I could see, is that there was a lot of money to be made, And this was different. This was different to Northern Ireland. This was different to Macedonia, different to Afghanistan. You could see that there was something else going on.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about peacekeeping.
The feeling on the ground was like...
It was febrile. It was... I likened it at the time. I remember thinking at the time, this must be what it was like to be in sort of the gold rush. You know, sort of San Francisco, 1848.
You felt like there was
money to be made.
There was money. Well, there was flying over in cargo planes, and they haven't accounted for half of it.
Yeah.
So
there
was a
that
feeling on the
atmosphere.
ground of like, oh, I can make it rich here.
You could smell it almost. You know, the sort of febrile atmosphere of what was going on.
But as someone who's officially with the SAS, which is an elite force, you couldn't take part in that sort of land grab.
No, we weren't there to take part in that land grab.
But you could feel that everybody else was, or all the superiors, all the mercenaries, everyone who came in, all the oil contractors who were the people who were doing construction on the city they just blew up, like Halliburton, all that. See, that kind of blows my mind, because that wasn't something that, you know, that I would consider. You think, oh, you know, there's enemy forces surrounding me. No, it's a land grab, and everybody's out to make some money. That's crazy.
That is every day you could feel that. You know, you could see it.
How could you? Please give me an example.
Well, you could see it because you've got all these private contractors driving all these people in suits around. You know, these people aren't driving around for no reason. You know, and you could just sense that this was a heist almost.
Because that's not how it played out on the TV sets of the world. It played out very much on, like, here are these poor impoverished Iraqis. You know, here are the insurgents that are holding them and fighting. And these are our brave boys in blue who are going over there and fighting the good fight and trying to bring democracy to the Middle East. And then you land on the ground and it's just like, dude, who are these guys in suits and all these flash SUVs going around with these private contractors and these amazing weapons? Just like, where did they come from? Who gave them the order?
Yeah.
And that just blows my mind. And you could feel it. You could feel it. You knew. So meanwhile, you're blowing doors off of, they say, go, find this insurgent, somebody who's, go find one of the baddies in this house. Now, you don't know who's actually in that house. Your commander knows, or thinks he knows, or someone's been tortured at Abu Ghraib to get the intel so you can do the night raid and have the firefight. So this is the strike back script. And you blow the door, but you don't actually know what's going on or who these people are, personally.
And you know what? I'm not even sure if our commanders, really knew what was going on. I mean, the thing is within the military is everyone in the military likes to think they know exactly what's going on, and we've got, we're on the inside, we know what's going on. But I actually think about, the operations we were doing in Iraq. Now, it's not just about torturing someone in Abu Ghraib.
The intel comes in various forms. I understand that.
And a lot of the way that intel comes in is people pay for it. Now,
part of the money grab. I know where the people live.
If you're in Iraq, if you're a Baghdad citizen in 2005, high unemployment, right? There's no electricity, there's no water. You've got a family. You need to provide. And someone comes up to you and says, "Do you know anything about the insurgency? Do you know anything about Al Qaeda? Do you know anything about sort of any remnants of the Baathists?" And you think to yourself, "Well, maybe."
Yeah.
And someone offers you $200. And maybe the first time you have got a bit of intel,
Right.
You kind of heard that there's a guy down the street who was involved in all that sort of stuff.
And maybe it pays off, and then they come to you again. Now, you don't have any intel, so either you're going to go find it and keep yours, or you're going to go, you know what? This intel I got's even better, so I want $2,000. And, it's Joe the barber. He's a bad guy, because he ripped me off 2 years ago, and it becomes this...
I often wonder about how many sort of personal scores or feudal things that we settled, through these...
For sure.
The way that we were collecting intelligence.
In 2005, so you land in 2005. When was the time between when you landed and when you saw action?
We were straight into it. So,
did you get a sleep and a shower and a meal?
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. I think we were probably doing, three jobs a week, maybe 4 jobs a week.
A job meaning what?
Going out in the night and detaining people.
That was essential. I mean, because the SAS, night raids are kind of a big deal now. They're very in vogue, along with the drone strikes and whatnot. And even since the war has ended, it still continues to this day. I mean, there were 38 people who died yesterday in Iraq, and that, I mean, in any other city that would be front page news.
Yeah,
and here it's like kind of buried on the international section, page 3. But that's everyone that the British and American troops were fighting. The sort of the Sunnis in Basra and whatnot, and Fallujah, it's been retaken. Now that the Americans have left, it's essentially been retaken. What did we do?
Well, Well,
Did we accomplish any good, in your opinion, by going over there?
No, not at all. But I don't think our intention was ever to do that.
What do you believe our intention was? I mean, just being on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, I think with any war, there are 1,000 motivations as to why we go there.
There's 1,000 players.
So, you could simplify it and say, well, there's the oil company. They want access to the oil fields. Now, that's true. That's definitely true, because I actually sat in on a Shell shareholder meeting in 2005, 2006 after I got out, and they were bragging about their new sort of discoveries in Iraq or their new acquisitions in Iraq, So that's definitely true. But that to leave it at that and say it was all about oil would be to deny the true nature of what was going on. You've got politicians who want to build their status.
Much as you did as a soldier.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So, you've got the likes of Blair and Bush who thought that, Blair often talks about, how he admired Churchill as this wartime leader, and I think Blair wanted to be that person, So you've got the politicians, the ego of the politicians. Then you've got the arms company. Now, an arms company is always going to make a lot of money out of war because you're using their product, and it needs replacing.
Yeah.
Then you've got the media. And the media likes a war.
They know how to cover a war.
Well,
and they're also you get supervised now. It's not like you have rogue reporters running around to you. There's like, no, you will get a military escort, and you will see what we show you.
But it's still just as profitable whether you've got a military escort or not. So the media hasn't really lost out in terms of that their sort of access to what's going on has been
level,
reduced.
They lost a lot of reporters. On a personal level, the media, they lost a lot of reporters. But again, those are just foot soldiers.
Yeah, but in terms of their profit, it probably doesn't matter whether they're embedded or not. Right. They're still making the same amount of money out of the war, So you've got all these hundreds and thousands of interests that push us towards this point where we go to war. And some of those interests have got more power and they've got more say, and some of those interests haven't got much say. But that's how we get there, It's not just one interest that gets us there.
Again, it's a complicated situation. I'm sorry to go back to this, but I really there I was. Take us through one particular episode that at least that sort of helped you form in your mind this is a massive foobar.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose for me it was a cumulative effect rather than one incident. Because say you go into someone's house one night and you've been given this guy's name, but that guy isn't there. But there are some other males in the house, and you detain those males because they must be guilty because they're in this house, and we've been told that this house is where the insurgents are.
And already you're using the language by referring to them as males.
Isn't that interesting?
There were four dudes in the house.
Why don't we just call them
There were four men. They were men. There were four men in the house.
Yeah. And so you would take these people in, and I mean, there were many things that were impacting on me. So on the one hand, you've got this febrile culture that's going on, and you can see that this is all about money, and you're starting to think, wait a minute, are we just here to facilitate this? Are we to make this easier for you? Are we going out every night to do this to make the place calmer so that you can take more out of it?
Right.
But then actually doing the job, going into these people's houses every night. I'll explain what we were doing, So imagine it's 2 a.m. You live in Bethnal Green, right? So you're in your flat.
It's a big place.
It's a big place. There's hundreds of thousands of people live there.
To my wife, seriously, I'm trying my best to come home tonight.
So you're in your home. It's 2 a.m. You're fast asleep. Just imagine you've got your kids next door. You and your wife, and maybe your extended family's in the house as well. And all of a sudden, there's a huge explosion. And before you've even worked out what's going on, what's happening to you, the house is full of dust. And your ears are ringing. And it's still dark because all the lights are off. And as you're sort of becoming awake to what's going on, there are 20 armed men. And they've infiltrated your whole house. And they're in every room. And you're being dragged out of your bed. And your wife is being dragged into one room, and your kids are being dragged into one room, and you're being dragged into another room.
Right.
And then you get interrogated, starting to be interrogated. Right. Who the fuck are you? Right. What's your name? What are you doing here? Blah, 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 blah. A brutal interrogation.
And if somebody's kind of bleary-eyed...
But whilst that's happening, the rest of us are going through your house, and we are ransacking it. We are turning over all these shelves. We're pulling open all these drawers. Those computers, we're just taking them off the tables. We're dumping them down in the corridor. We're going through money. Great. We'll put that in the pile. You know, phones. We're taking everything that you could possibly could be important to.
You're like a militarized man with a van. You're just coming. You're removal.
We're like the bailiffs. We're like the bailiffs. So any paperwork we see that looks like it could be important, we take that. So within 20 minutes, half an hour, your kids are completely traumatized. Yeah. Your wife is freaking out. Yeah. You've pissed yourself. Yeah. You're being dragged out the door. We're taking all your possessions as well with us. You're put on a helicopter. You've never been on a helicopter before, right? You're being chucked on a helicopter. Your hands are cuffed together with plastic so tight that your hands are starting to swell, right? You can't see. You've got these goggles on. You've got these ear things on so you can't hear. You know, you've been dragged off. Your family's left at home, right? Your kids are crying. Your wife's distraught, right? And they've got no way of protecting themselves, earning a living, you know. Also, in Arabic society, that the male within the family is like a hero, and you've just been humiliated in front of your family, right? And that happens to you. Imagine that happening to you. Or imagine you're a child watching that happen to your father. Imagine you're a wife watching that happen. And just take that one part of it, right? And doing that again and again. And I started to look at these kids, I started to look at these women, and I started to think, what must they be thinking of us, you know? And as someone who grew up reading stories about how we stopped the Nazis, right? All this nonsense.
When it was way more black and white.
It's actually mortifying, Ben.
And you think, who are we? What have we become? What have I become? You know? I'm doing this.
You're part of that machine.
And you know what?
You're the tippity tip of the spear, my friend. At SAS, that's...
And it doesn't stop there, because then these guys are taken back. Now, we were talking earlier on about compartmentalisation, right?
Yeah.
That's when you divide up a job into smaller jobs. Now, if we take the World War II analogy, what happened with the genocide is that a French policeman went into the Jews' house and pulled the Jews out, and he passed them on. And those people were put on a train, and they were probably driven by a French train driver. And then maybe at some point a German train driver took over. And then they turned up at the prison camp and someone took them off the train, took their clothes off and put them in a stripy suit. Then someone else shaved their heads, right? By the time this person's gone through this process, and there's many more components to it, by the time they get to the guy who puts them into the gas chamber, they're no longer a human, right? Now, if that French policeman who took them out of the house in the first place was able to follow them or was a part of the whole process, he would never do it.
But he's just driving people from point A to point B.
Right, so if we now look at Iraq,
shoes.
If we now look at Iraq, we've got people getting the intelligence, right? Now, they're just interacting with, you know, people on the street, you know, in a human sort of scenario. Right. Then you've got the guys doing the surveillance. They're looking at people in their family day. They're seeing them going to the shop.
So you do have...
They're seeing them go to the school. They're seeing them take their kids.
You've got good cop.
Right, so they're seeing that part. But then we go in and do the night raid, right? Now, we're seeing the people in a sort of shock of capture part of it, right? Now, by the time we take these people back to our base and hand them over to the interrogators, these people are wearing a dish dash, their hands are cuffed, they've got a blindfold on, and they've got the headphones on. What do they look like? What does that image say?
Terrorist.
What is that image?
Terrorist. Yeah.
Terrorist. Yeah. Who dressed them like the terrorist? Who made them look like the terrorist?
Right, he might have been wearing sweats and a...
We have created that terrorist. And by the time you hand them over to the interrogator...
They already look...
They are terrorists, right? And they trust us, right? Just like we trust the guy who does the surveillance. Just like he trusts the guy who does the intelligence gathering. So if the guy who does the intelligence gathering says this guy's a terrorist, and then the surveillance guy says this guy's a terrorist, and then we say this guy's a terrorist, we hand him over and he looks like a terrorist to the torturer, what's he going to think?
I was to say. So, and then, as the torturer, you can put one of these 5% psychopaths. You know, there's someone who's there's someone who's doing that who maybe loves his job.
Yeah, but I'm not sure if all of them do love their job. You know.
No, but it would be better to put in someone who's a stone cold psychopath to do that job, and you're certainly out of a pool of 100, you're going to have 2.
But then let's look at popular culture. So we've got 24, where I've never actually watched it, but I've been told that in 24 there are lots of scenes where they catch a terrorist and they have to torture him to get the information out.
Oh yeah.
Now, if that is what the public's perception of what you do to these people who've captured, right? And I think that people learn from what they see in TV a lot.
The episode of, I'm not kidding, I did watch Strike Back with my lunch. The episode today, the two guys, they kind of, they're having a conversation, they're bantering and this and that, and then they come up and there's a guy strapped to a mattress frame, blindfolded, and they're having a conversation about what they ate for dinner last night, and then they pick up the wires off the car battery and just hook the guy up and just like tell us where he's going to attack next.
Yeah.
And then they cut back and they go, "Oh, that was dirty work. So now we have to go and stop this train from leaving Belgium." So what is happening?
So what I'm thinking though is that with these interrogators and these torture, people who carry out this torture, is they might not be psychopaths. They just think, "Oh, this is how I behave in this situation." And then let's go back to that hierarchical pressure and that peer pressure and that indoctrination. And we mustn't forget about how powerful those things are, how powerful those pressures are on people. And then, it's easy to see how these things happen.
Now, okay, you're saying that it was kind of a combined, the cumulative effect of all the horrors of war that you witnessed, combined with the crazy land grab, money grab, oil grab, and you're in there having been trained to do a very specific job in a very highly specialized field of violence. Mm. You're saying it was the cumulative effect that eventually sort of kickstarted your conscience and pushed you out of the machine to sort of like almost a newborn to come out and go, "This was horrible," and then to speak out against it. Mm. But is there, because I know people with PTSD. I have a friend, and it's not combat related. His girlfriend was they were walking they were walking along the side of the road. They'd had an argument because they'd run out of gas, right? And this had happened before. They had a shouting, and they went walking off. And a van from nowhere, she's black, he's white, came out of nowhere, like purposely, as he describes, came off the road, crossed the median, and just plucked her off the side of the road and knocked her into a ditch. They never caught the guy. It was, in their minds, a clear attack, not an accident. And he was basically on the road praying for drivers to stop. She's one of my good friends. He says, if it's a beautiful day, he just flips out because it was a beautiful day when she got hit. No clouds in the sky, sun, 90 degrees, California, driving down the 101. Now, if it's a beautiful day, it just freaks him out. And you're like, dude, what's wrong? That's what's in his head. Mm. And what's in your head?
Yeah. I mean, that's a I suppose that's kind of a personal question, And,
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot in my head, there's, I suppose in some ways there's almost like a constant movie of stuff, going on that's on a sort of replay.
Give me a frame.
I think a lot about those kids and those men and those women, having known what happened to these people afterwards as well. A lot of these guys were tortured and held in secret prisons, and I often think about those people and the looks on their faces and that when we were doing this stuff to them, Yeah, but there's a lot of stuff that happens, and
it's cool, man. I'm California.
Yeah,
We're very touchy-feely people.
Very touchy-feely there.
I mean, listen, I struggle in this culture to just can I get a whoop whoop? No, I cannot get a whoop whoop for love or money. Can I get a hug? No. Can I get an emotional response? And you're SAS, man. You wear some tough armor. And I think part of the popular perception and the misconceptions come because, you shoot a long-range shotgun. You can blow off doors. Like, that's super cool, man. You go, yeah, that is super cool because we're men. And that's, especially if we all remember what it's like to be 17 and to play cowboys and Indians or to play, to play the Nazis and the French or whatever, the equivalent is. I'm trying. I realize maybe this is hard or maybe not even appropriate. But here on Litopia After Dark, we're not afraid to ask the tough or stupid questions. I'm trying to get under the armor, sure. And you have taken some off. You founded Veterans for Peace, or the UK chapter. You go out publicly speaking against not just the Iraqi war, but war in general.
Yeah.
And so you've already, it's...
Yeah. No, it's, I think you've hit on something about the sort of British psyche, in terms of our sort of...
Sorry, it's a bit obvious.
Our cold nature.
Yeah.
It's
not a cold nature, because it's all, you're having the same feelings. You're having the same thing as us amphibious, wet California hipsters. Like, we have the feelings, and if I went through that, I would just be a babbling emotional wreck. Whereas you come from a culture where that's decidedly not cool. And if you see a psychiatrist, you're certainly not going to tell your mates down the pub. Whereas that's a talking point where I come from.
Right.
Like, you go to therapy, like, how's your therapist? Yeah, he's pretty good. We talked about my dad a lot today. So, and that's part of the reason Pete has me here, is to try to get under the skin of British culture as well. And you're SAS, man. You've come out of the system, and I think you're in a position to, and it's crucial. I mean, there were 38 people killed yesterday. How many were killed in January? 698 civilian casualties in Iraq. Just in January, the month isn't even half over. So, and now they're talking about, let's go into, what's hot? Because we have all these weapons we got to use. These Hellfire missiles are going to go bad. They've got an expiry date. Man, I got a whole lot of eggs about to go off. Y'all best believe we're having omelets tomorrow. So we're going to Syria. Or, oh boy, when Bush was reelected in 2008, I have a friend who was a reporter, and he was at the GOP National Convention, right? And not the national, it was like some party on election night in Las Vegas. And when Bush won his re-election, I believe it was 2008. 2004, sorry, that's right. It was 2004. He says everyone in the bar, full of people who'd voted Republican, they started chanting, Tehran, Tehran, Tehran. And you're like, what? That flipped him out. He could not believe that was what was going on. So you're in that position. You're in that position to better than most people, especially because you come from the tippity tip of the spear. I'm not talking to the cook. I'm talking to the guy who blew off the doors. And I'm trying to humanize that. And you're trying to humanize that.
Yeah.
What sticks with you?
Yeah, like I say, a lot of what sticks with me is those night raids, but also some what could be seen as funny things.
Yeah, well, good. Please
give
us some gallows humor, for crying out loud.
I spent a couple of nights out with an American armoured unit. They're in the tanks, right? And they're sort of backing us up. And we're driving back from a job one night, and all the guys have gone back, I think, either by helicopter or on the quicker vehicles, and we're driving these tanks back into Baghdad.
As you do.
And there's this noise, it's like, and I'm sat in the back. I think I was in a Bradley, and I shouted up to the guy driving. I said, "What's going on? What's that noise?" He goes, "Oh, it's the lampposts." I go, "What do you mean it's the fucking lampposts?" And he goes, "Oh, we're knocking down the lampposts." I said, "Well, stop knocking down the lampposts." He goes, "We always do this." I was sort of banging my head against the side of the Bradley, going, have you not thought of the sort of damage that we're doing?
Right. I mean, each lamppost is 30 grand, and
but also these people hate us enough as it is. The last thing they need is for us to also, as well as invade their homes, take their families away, ransack their homes. Let's knock down the lampposts as well.
It's in the it's Michael Moore's Michael Moore's film. You have the guys in the tank blowing, just basically blowing shit up, and they're playing, burn motherfucker, burn heavy metal in the tank. What are the differences between the British troops and the American troops on the ground in Iraq? Was there a clear cut, aside from the uniforms, was there a different mentality?
Well, it's an interesting discussion, this, because when we first joined in this joint enterprise with the United States, there was a whole sort of argument put within the British military and within British society that the British Army, having all this experience in Northern Ireland and all this other stuff, would be like a break on American excesses.
I remember people saying that, that's right.
Right. You remember that argument, right, yeah. Well, actually what happened is that we were 10% and the American military was 90%.
Right.
Guess who influenced who, right?
Interesting. Well, there was definitely some lapdoggery with Tony Blair.
Right. So I mean, whilst I was in, to be fair, we did kill less people than our American counterparts.
What, per troop?
Well, per job, yeah.
Per job.
So, but that's because our rules of engagement were different. So our rules of engagement were that you had to be faced with lethal force. And for a British soldier at that time, that meant that someone had to have a weapon and be pointing it at you.
In order to engage.
Yeah.
So, okay,
or be shot at.
So in a night raid, if someone breaks into my house, especially if I'm, back in the States, if someone breaks into my house and I don't know what's going on, I'm going to reach for my shotgun under the bed, and therefore I'm going to get killed?
Let's look at the reality of the situation. If someone uses explosives to get into your house at 2 a.m., unless you are a highly dedicated, highly trained person, you ain't reaching for no shotgun. Right.
Although we do have some people who, if you knock on the door, they just fire at will. So don't ever underestimate the Americans' ability to use a firearm, friend.
But let's go back to those rules of engagement. So the American rules of engagement were something a bit different. They were, if you feel threatened. Now, that's an entirely different concept. And as a result of those rules of engagement, we'd often go out on jobs. We'd be in one house, they'd be in the other house. They would meet resistance.
Right.
And, 2 people would be killed. And we wouldn't. And if this happened once, then you'd say, oh, it's just a one-off. But when this happens on a regular basis, you start to think, oh, wait a minute, there's something going on here. Now, that's not to blame those American troops, because it's not. They were acting within the rules that they were given them.
But how often did it happen that people killed, that American troops killed people out of fear? They were just like, oh, they're freaked out. They're 19. They don't know, this is their first time. Never mind out of the country, out of their state.
Yeah.
And now they're suddenly surrounded by, and they've been told that this is a worthy mission of, we're going to take out the people who blew up the buildings in 9/11, and this, you're going to fight for God and country. And suddenly you end up in this.
Well, exactly. And I know a lot of the guys.
Feel threatened, man. They felt threatened getting off the plane.
Well, I know a lot of the guys who were American infantry in Iraq, I've met since, and a lot of these guys were deployed for over a year. They were manning the same checkpoints, for over a year. They were going out patrolling the same street for over a year. And when you're doing that job, and I used to do that job in Northern Ireland, I did that job in Afghanistan, when you're just patrolling, the sort of expectation can build, and if people are getting injured or killed around you, the odds start to shorten, don't they? So
right.
Things can become pretty intense, and say for example,
it's only going to happen twice a year. But you've been there 2 years. Yeah.
And say for example, one of your friends has been blown up at a checkpoint by a vehicle packed with explosives. Well, the next time a vehicle comes driving towards you, you're going to be freaked out, Yeah. And that's not to excuse what's happened, but it's to try and explain.
It's not to excuse what's happened, but I think then as soon as something goes wrong, it immediately gets blamed on the guy who pulled the trigger.
Yeah.
And it's compartmentalized also to where it can, I don't know. It reminds me of kind of lizard losing its tail. As soon as controversy grabs hold of it, it's like, oh, we lost those guys, and the lizard runs away and regrows its tail. Well, those, and the heron will eat the rest of that tail. Why not? So that's how you get rid of that problem. So it's inbuilt so that the people higher up don't. I mean, who got blamed? Who went to prison for Abu Ghraib?
Exactly, and
the poor woman who did those horrible things and had her picture taken. Oh, she's going down for sure.
Yeah.
But that went all the way up the chain.
And that's a common occurrence where atrocities or, acts that, war crimes have happened in Iraq and Afghanistan, and it's the lowest possible rank that ends up doing the time for that.
It's parallel. I mean, I know this is, but it's parallel to the banking crisis. How many people have gone, how many of the CEOs wiped out people's families, homes, retirements? How many of them have gone to prison? Well, they're saying, oh, we put Bernie Madoff away. Because he was obviously running a Ponzi scheme. But everybody else who was operating under the law, under the terms of engagement, they're still high and mighty. They claim this is a success. They got medals. They got medals on their chest for this. So you come home. What made you decide to speak out?
I think it basically came down to a sense of either duty or obligation.
I thought morality had been removed from your consciousness by the process of becoming an SAS soldier.
Well, whilst I was a British soldier, I had definite ideas about what British soldiers should be doing. And I suppose a lot of what I was brought up on was the Falklands War. You know, that was the sort of war before I joined. And, you know, that was fighting an enemy who had invaded British territory. You know, put aside the rights and wrongs of the Falklands War. This is what I was brought up with.
I get you, but honestly, that's kind of a silly war to have.
Of course it was, yeah. But, and then, you know, all the way through my career, we were trained, or either trained to, or, you know, taught to.
The Falkland War was not a silly war. It's very important to people. I understand there are many different angles. I just want to say that for the record. Anyone who's fought there, any veterans out there, you know, respect, but it was kind of like, you know, small beer compared to Vietnam.
But the thing about the Falklands War was that it was pretty much entirely one army against another army.
Yeah, it was a chess match.
Yeah, and what I was confronted with in Iraq was, so we were trained to a very high standard. We were like the best soldiers that Britain, or the best unit that Britain had to deploy. And who were we deployed against? Civilians.
Right.
And for me, that was like, this isn't a fair fight.
Right.
You know, if I had deployed to Iraq and spent every day fighting insurgents, you know, and like real insurgents, you know, and it was quite obvious that
going
these people
down the twisted, there were a line of Saddam had 1 million tanks, they said, and he was going to come at us hard, and that's why we did shock and awe. And it turned out that, like, actually most of the tank drivers just bailed.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, who knows where I'd be now? But the reality of what happened to me was that I was deployed against civilians. And, you know, whilst I was in Iraq, you know, we were living in the same houses that Saddam Hussein's henchmen used to live in.
Jeez.
Yes.
And we were using the same prisons that Saddam Hussein used to use.
Because it's infrastructure that's already there.
And I actually believe that we were deployed against the same people that Saddam Hussein probably used to deploy against, as in, you know, sort of political resistance. Political resistance to Saddam Hussein, political resistance to our occupation. That's who we were deployed against. You know, you might want to call them the insurgency, you might want to call them terrorists or whatever.
Obviously the players changed, but the uniform was the same.
Yeah, as in the players
like you were
dominating that country changed from Saddam Hussein to us.
So you were just fighting a different set of political adversaries.
No, I think
you think you were fighting the same.
It's possible that we could have been fighting the same people that Saddam Hussein was fighting. The moral courage it would have taken to be a political opponent of Saddam Hussein, right? That the sort of person who was strong enough to resist Saddam Hussein would have been the same person who also resisted our occupation, right? So, that's who I think we were going after.
I see. So people who were basically resistant to tyranny.
Yeah.
We're going to
because if you were resisting the tyranny of Saddam Hussein, you would resist the tyranny of the occupation, surely. If they're using the same tactics and the same prisons.
Didn't we drop leaflets that said, "Hey, we're going to destroy your entire city in the name of you leading a happy democratic life"? Did they not get the memo?
Well, you know, I don't know if you've read much of the sort of, you know, the WikiLeaks releases. You know, I followed the case of Chelsea Manning closely over the last few years, and she said in one of her court statements that that she was tasked to look into these people who've been detained.
Chelsea Manning being
Bradley Manning.
Yeah. Oh, Bradley Manning. Yeah. Okay.
She was asked to look into this case where these people have been detained and work out, you know, what the cause was there. And she's looked into this and found out that these were political opponents of the occupation, non-violent political opponents. They'd been detained, they'd been put in prison by the Iraqi Federal Police, I think it was. And she's gone to her superior and said, hey, these people aren't insurgents, they're not terrorists, they're Democrats. They're trying to affect change through non-violent means. They don't agree with the occupation. Fuck off, go find me some more terrorists. That's what she was told, right?
Right.
So this is what's going on in this country, you know. The last thing you want is non-violent, democratic activists in that country.
This is the thing. I think we can all agree, and I think even American opinion polls will agree that, you know, this was a colossal waste of time, money, lives, blood, and we had to get out, and we've done tons of damage, and we've ruined this society that we were supposedly bringing, you know, peace and democracy. Or at least, certainly what it said on the tin was not what we gave to the Iraqi people, and I think most people who are even, minimally informed would agree with that. And it's being, you know, the Sunni insurgency is basically filling the void left by the American and British troops who've since evacuated. I mean, 700 civilians dead just in the first half of this month. Just in your personal opinion, obviously, is there anything that can be done to repair the damage? Should there be any kind? Should America, should the Brits have any kind of part in reconstruction, or is it just like, whoa, hands off, let it all kind of settle down, and anyone walks out of the smoking crater, we'll give them a handshake?
Well, let's roll this back a bit, because for a start, both Britain and America were kicked out of Iraq. We didn't leave. Britain was kicked out by the Iraqi government in about 2009.
Did you not get the memo? I'm pretty sure we left as victors, I think you'll find.
No, we tried to get the Iraqi government to sign a memorandum of status forces agreement, or some political term, I can't remember exactly what it was, which basically said that we're going to stay in your country and we want immunity from prosecution. And the Iraqi government said, no, if you're going to stay in our country and you commit crimes, you're going to be prosecuted. And so we left.
Because you wanted to drive over the lampposts.
Right. So we need to, and this is an important point though, because we need to recognise that we were defeated in Iraq. We were told to leave, right?
This was a defeat?
This was a defeat.
No. You're not listening to the spin, my friend.
Well,
we walked away as victors.
Well, did we? So the British were defeated in Basra.
George Bush is in his ranch right now painting pictures of
and the Americans were told to leave. Now, in terms of victory, well, let's look who's in charge. We've got a Shiite version of Saddam Hussein in charge, a guy called Maliki, who is just as brutal. One of the reasons there's a Sunni insurgency at the minute is because how brutally this guy has sort of stamped on all dissent.
Right.
And let's look at the broader picture of what's going on, because we can look at Iraq now, and basically Iraq and Syria are sort of the border there has almost disappeared. This is how sort of crazy this has got. In Syria, we are backing a Sunni opposition to defeat a Shia president, Assad. In Iraq...
The enemy of my enemy.
In Iraq, we are backing the Shia president to defeat that same insurgency. Literally, next door. How crazy is that?
I mean,
in Libya, we backed the sort of Islamist, sort of Al-Qaeda affiliated terrorists, and then a year later we helped the French deploy to Mali to stop those same people coming into Mali. This stuff is crazy. It's irrational.
What are we trying to do? What are we actually trying to do? Because you can lay this out and all the different players, and you can draw strings down. What is that? Is it every man for himself as far as governments and are concerned, as far as contractors are concerned? It's such a complex web. But what is the actual aim? What is the actual aim of all this violence? What is it accomplishing?
I'm not sure what it's accomplishing. It's irrational.
How do we stop it? Where is the handbrake on the whole operation?
Well, I think we've got ourselves into a situation in the West, Britain and America especially, where we have realised that we are at the height, as it were, of our economic and military power. And it's only going to get worse. It's only going to go downhill. And we're kind of doing...
die fighting?
We're kind of doing anything we can to kind of stay on top, And it's irrational what we're doing. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to maintain our position as the sort of the policeman of the world and the economic power of the world. Look what we're doing to our economies. That's just as crazy as well. Does that make any sense? And it's all this trying to kind of effort to remain on top.
Well, if you look at the end of the British Empire, that was a bloody, that was Britain on top of the world. And as they decide, as they kind of cut loose India and cut loose Africa, and there was mass bloodshed, mass war, and that's essentially maybe what's happening now as America kind of loses its grip on power and the penny turns. There's going to be this massive bloodletting, and India and Pakistan and that border, and then it'll kind of stabilize.
This is a West-centric view that you're putting. You're saying that as the American empire sort of disintegrates, there's going to be an increase in violence. Wait a minute. Since the Second World War, we've had a huge amount of violence perpetrated on the Koreans, the Vietnamese, the Malayans, the Kenyans. We could carry on naming cultures that have been decimated by our violence. So to say that this violence is going to increase, it's already at a huge level.
In the short term. So what happens
compared to what?
Okay, no, but here's the thing. Everybody goes home. All right, we're all set. Sorry. The Americans, we got to fix our economy. We actually have 70,000 bridges that need repair and might fall down at any minute. we got mass unemployment. We're all going home. Sorry, guys. Look, here, whatever you need, just ask. We'll build a few hospitals and schools, and we're out. And we just do a hands off. The backlash is going to be, the conventional wisdom says the backlash of these reconstructing cultures that are trying to build themselves out of the rubble, they're going to hate us in the rest of living memory. Their children, their children's children.
No, I think these people hate us for what we do. So
if we stop doing that, they'll forgive us, truth and reconciliation style?
Imagine this, right? Imagine this, if we did say... we've already said we're going to leave Afghanistan, but imagine if we said that we are going to stop supporting Israel.
Okay.
Now, at the minute, I'm pretty sure that the Palestinians, whether it's Hamas or the PLO, and Hezbollah up in the Lebanon there, they probably hate us as a society, or they hate what we do. Now, if through political change in this country we manage to force our governments to stop backing Israel in its persecution of the Palestinians, right? I think those people would kind of like us.
Okay, but then they would descend on Israel with knives drawn, and Israel would launch a nuclear attack, and it would
who says that would happen?
Okay, but we say that. But you could say that, but and again, I don't want to get into the Middle East because that is another diabolical boondoggle. But Israel itself is they have their point of you don't know what it's like to have enemies on all sides. We are bristling with weapons because we have enemies on all. There's something to be said from what they're doing is absolutely abhorrent, but for the Israeli people, we really don't want them coming over the walls, so we're going to all kind of arm ourselves. I'm asking, as far as Iraq goes, I know it's all different webs. Created this massive mess. Is there anything that we can do as a people, as a nation, as a combination as a coalition? God, I'm waiting for... I know everyone hates the UN, but can we please act like a planet here?
I think what we can do is that we can't right the wrongs that we've committed in Iraq, okay? We've created an awful mess in that country. What we can do is we can learn from our mistakes. And what we can learn from our mistakes is that, we cannot solve the world's problems through military force. Military force is not the answer to any of our solutions. And you can even ask the generals in Afghanistan this, and they will tell you there is not a military solution to the problem in Afghanistan, which begs the question, what have we been doing there for the last 12 years? Okay, we need to start looking outside of these military solutions, because what's happened within our societies over the last 100 years is that we've been infected through a whole load of different interests into believing that the answer to every problem is a military one. So that when we've got a foot and mouth crisis in the UK, the answer is to deploy the military. Right? When the fire brigade go on strike, we deploy the military. When there's riots in the streets of Tottenham, who do we deploy? Oh, you've got advocates for deploying the military. Right? When there's a hurricane in Louisiana,
fans.
Right? When there's a hurricane in Louisiana,
yeah, absolutely. That's where the people are.
Right.
That's where that's where the bodies are.
We need to get out of this crazy idea that military force can sort out the problems that we are faced with in the modern global society.
How can we force the hand of people who are ostensibly leading us to actually promote peace and not through violence?
Yeah, I think for a start, that people need to understand and become educated as to what it's like to be on the receiving end of Western power. So when I left the military in 2005, one of the things that really got to me when I came home was that the disparity between what I had experienced and what I was being shown on the TV and what our politicians were saying. Made me really angry, and this is where I felt this duty and this obligation to tell people.
This was in 2008, so the war was...
No, 2005.
Oh, you left in 2005?
Yeah, and I started speaking in late 2005. And that's why, is because I saw what people were being told back home, and I saw what the public perception of what was happening in Iraq was so far away from what I'd been experienced that I thought people need to know. People need to know what's going on over there. So I think that there's a disparity between what actually happens, and this is probably in many spheres of our society. It's not just about the military, it's probably banking, and it's probably a whole load of things, education. There's a disparity between what actually happens and what the public think happens, and we need to bridge that gap.
You came home and you spoke out. What did your brothers in arms think about your decision, like to actually promote peace, to found a chapter of an organization that promotes peace, that pledges nonviolence.
You know, I'm not allowed to talk to them, and they're not allowed to talk to me. So who knows what they think
Allegedly.
about this.
Allegedly, if you were to have these fictional people that you used to hang out with in a fictional world of where on Call of Duty, you had some guys you used to play Call of Duty with, and then you checked out and said, you know what, actually, this is not a good use of my time. If you were to have spoken to them, how do you think they might react?
Well, I think it would be similar to a lot of the other veterans I speak to, and that is that it takes people different amounts of time. But I think most veterans get to the same conclusion, and that is that what we were doing was irrational and immoral, and that it didn't solve anything, and it was the wrong thing to do. And I think that most veterans get to that point. It might take them years. They might hold on to that military ethos or that sense of self that they get from being in uniform.
It was part of your DNA.
Yeah. But I think that eventually people get to the point where when they come to that realisation, that sort of epiphany, oh, that's what it was about. You know, that's what I was doing.
How was it for you being cut off from these people who were essentially had your back from the time you deployed? I mean, I imagine some very close bonds were formed.
Yeah, I mean, I worked with the same guys for years on end, you know. But the thing is that once I'd come to my decision not to return to Iraq, once I'd come to the decision that I couldn't take part in this anymore, almost immediately I was different to them. You know, we were no longer the same group.
You'd fallen out. You'd come out of the flock. You'd come out of the machine.
Yeah.
To do your own thing, and
even
suddenly
if
they were still a part of it.
Yeah, and even if there weren't any personal grievances or personal disagreements, you know, it's kind of hard to maintain a relationship when your former comrades.
Hey, it's
still
hard.
Think this.
It's hard to have friends out of any workplace. You know, I guess. And when you're not at work, then you don't go to the office party.
Yeah, but it was also a culture that for me had lost its sort of shine. You know, the ideal of being a soldier. You know, the hardship, the hunger, the
things,
the drudgery of it. And then you see that all of that effort, all of that dedication is actually funneled and focused onto smashing up people's houses, you know.
And pulling them out in the dead of night.
And chucking them over to be tortured. And it suddenly loses all of its luster.
You're like, you know what, I'm done.
It's like, imagine if you was a professional footballer and you were naive and you thought everything was great, and then you turn up you made it into the pro team. Right. And then you suddenly find out that all the guys are injecting steroids or injecting EPO. And you decide, I can't do that, you know.
Right.
And you're looking at it, go, you thought it was something else, and then
when you finally get to the big leagues, you realize, oh, I'm fighting at the tippity tip of the spear. I'm pulling civilians out of their house on possibly dodgy intel.
Yeah.
In this country, a lot of folks in America don't know, and it was a big surprise to me that we all have to wear a poppy, and there is a huge pressure over here to wear the orange poppy.
The
red poppy. It's orange. Look at it. Come on, that's an orange poppy. It's a red flower. I'm sorry, the people of Britain. I realize I come over here, but I'm a foreigner. I look over and I see it's orange. This is a red tablecloth. It's not this color. Why should people wear or not wear the poppy?
I don't think anyone should have to wear the poppy.
Should have to?
Well, it's a discussion we have within Veterans for Peace in the UK. So some of our members are D-Day veterans. You know, they were there in 1944, you know.
Okay.
And their perception or their idea about what the poppy means is completely different to what our idea is as younger veterans, you know, Iraq, Afghanistan veterans. And for them, they still hold on to that older ideal, which I think was prevalent after the First World War, in which that this was a symbol of loss. This was a symbol to remind people about how terrible the First World War was. And if it was still about that, then I would wear a red poppy.
But it's passing out of living memory.
But it's not
come
about
to
that.
Represent.
It's not about that. And the reason that I know it's not about that is because I've sat down with the head of Remembrance of the British Legion. You know, these are the people who run the poppy appeal. And try and get them to answer a straight question about what the poppy even means. What does it notify? What does it mean to wear a poppy? What does it say when I'm wearing a poppy? And you ask them and you'll find it quite hard to actually get a straight answer out of them. They'll say things like, oh, it means many things to many people, you know.
Where does the money go? It's £1. It's a little plastic clip-on. It comes in 3 parts. It's impossible to get it to stay on your clothes.
It's more interesting to ask about where the money comes from. Because if you look at the Royal British Legion accounts, you know, A big funder is British Aerospace. Britain's biggest arms company. Now, what interest have they got in promoting the poppy appeal?
We may not have guns on the street here, folks, but we make a whole lot of them over here in merry old England, and we're actually one of the world's biggest arms suppliers.
Yeah, it's not actually about raising money through the selling of poppies. It's about promoting something. Because if you're spending 30 million on something, you're promoting something. Now, what are you promoting? Now, if we look at the posters that are on the tube trains, they're not saying, look at war, look how bad it is. They're saying, support our troops.
Support our troops.
And they're also saying this. They're saying, if you go to war and you lose a leg, it's all right, we'll give you a robot leg and you'll be able to climb a mountain. Or you'll be able to row across the Atlantic. It won't be that bad for you. You will still be a hero. Right. That is what is happening. They are sanitising war. They are making the military and war, they're trying to make it as if it's a normal part of our society, as if it's something that we should be doing. As if there isn't an alternative.
So it's not actually remembrance, it's just support of the machine that's
opposite of remembrance. It is a complete lack of remembrance.
So here you have the poppy appeal, and you're saying that instead of getting people to remember the horrors and tragedies of war, which the original, your people who stormed the beaches in Normandy would say it represents something else entirely. It's turning the public more towards, more away from pacifism and keeping the status quo, solving conflicts.
It is promoting the military as if it is a heroic institution.
So would you liken it to the commercials in America of the Marine standing with a sword, saying, join the Marines, the proud, the few?
I went on the BBC recently to discuss the poppy, and I was persuaded by a friend not to make this comment, but I'm going to make it tonight. Awesome. During the poppy appeal, which lasts 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks before Armistice Day. It used to be a week, and then it gets longer and longer. The Royal British Legion decided to give these oversized poppy lollipops, this is the only thing I can describe them as, to these children, and dress them in T-shirts, and the motto on the T-shirt or the legend said, "Future Soldier," right? They also had a giant poppy in King's Cross Station that was huge. It was right. To me, and this is my own personal opinion, to me, they look like swastikas. That is what I think.
Really?
I think when you look at those children and you look at the propaganda films by Leni Riefenstahl in the 1930s, and you see these German kids running around in the fields and with the swastikas and all the rest of it, not really knowing what they're doing, not really knowing what the symbol means, for me, that is how far we're getting.
Wow, that is quite the outrageous statement. Are you calling me a Nazi, sir?
and I'll clarify this even further. When I went on the BBC about this issue, if you were to go onto the television during that period, during that time of the year, 100% of the people wear the poppy. Why? Because they employ someone to make sure that everyone who appears on the BBC wears a poppy. Now, it just so happened that this show was on the radio. Only 2 out of 6 are wearing the poppy.
Oh, no way.
Right? Where was the enforcement? Surely it means the same thing. And what was really telling was one of the women who was sticking up for the poppy appeal and sticking up for this sort of militaristic version of Remembrance, she wasn't wearing a poppy either. So and I just wonder if the Nazis wore their swastikas in private or if that was just for public consumption.
I also think the swastikas were more than a quid.
Yeah.
Generally, they had much higher production values in Germany. I'm not going to touch that with a barge pole, my friends, but you've been watching Litopia After Dark. I'm Ian Wynn, the techno-pagan octopus messiah, joined by the esteemed super agent, Mr. Peter Cox, and we've been talking to Ben Griffin, who is a former member of the SAS, who has gone on to found the UK chapter of Veterans for Peace. He's a pacifist now. He's preaching nonviolence. He's bringing it to the streets. He's bringing it to the people. Ben, where can we find you on the web?
www.veteransforpeace.org.uk.
We will flash that up on the screens. It's been an illuminating talk. It's been emotional. I'm touched, man. Touch me, big guy. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Ben. It's been a pleasure and an honor to have you on the show.
Thanks, Ian.